And now we're going to get some experiences. It's a blended panel again, some with more experiences on using key enabling technologies to mobilize business, some with more experience on working with value chains, global value chains, and also some with the policy perspective and how these, the instruments, kind of how in the instrumentation of things, how we're changing. So I'm going to give each of you the word to tell a little bit about your experiences with either KETs or value chains or both, and some of your perspectives on these issues, focusing on the how, the operational aspects, and then open it up to the broader discussion for us to have a chat. So I'll give the floor to you, Hans, first.
Okay, thank you.
You can introduce
Good morning.
where you're from and what you work with.
I'm from the region. I work at the Regional Development Organization in the North Netherlands. But I represent a what you call a cluster, I think. We call it the region of smart factories, and it's a big program that's now 2 years on its way. And we work with about 40 companies on smart factories, so it's the concept of Industry 4.0. It's a big program also in financial terms. We have a budget of 30 million euro altogether for a period of 4 years. So 30. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and I keep thinking, oh my God, what an awful lot of results do I need to produce for this budget. But we have made a very good start. We are now on the way from a cluster which is more closed and rigid to an ecostructure, which is more open and smart. So the project in itself has a lot of dynamics. We will perhaps discuss these. I don't know what you, is it?
Could you maybe give an example of how you work, if we talk about what is it that you do as a cluster work, Industry 4.0 cluster? I haven't met so many of those. What do you work with to help your SMEs become more competitive?
Industry is undergoing an enormous transition towards digitalized manufacturing and digitalized everything. So if you take products or process, it is nowadays about connectivity, about autonomous products, about intelligent products. So that's for most industry, it's a very big transition, and it's not easy to do it in the right way. We cooperate together to join this transition. Most of the work is done in 11 pilot projects, so we build smart factories. So, for example, a big partner in the project is the Philips company in Drachten. They produce shavers, 3,000 people, and one of the most advanced manufacturing firms in the world. But it's very rigid, and what we do together with our SMEs, we flexibilize the production. That's the so we have two groups of stakeholders, apart from the universities and the knowledge institutes. We have the big manufacturing companies like Philips, and we have the SMEs who develop the cornerstones for smart factories. So big data companies, deep learning, sensor companies, industrial automation, robotics. So these produce the building blocks, and what we try in this pilot project is to experiment with all kind of concept or sub-concepts of the smart factory. Okay. That's the main work. Of course, we built on the ecostructure. We changed the name. It was originally Region of Smart Factories, but it will be Region of Smart Manufacturing. So we put focus on the ecostructure. We have, for example, our own professors at the moment. We have 10 PhDs working in our projects. We are building a center of expertise, and that will be a little bit like this entrance area, but then for manufacturing.
Okay.
We try to build the region to promote the region as the region of smart factories. For example, we go to the Hannover Messe. A couple of years, that's the main trade fair for the technological industry every year in Hanover. We have our own stand. We applied for a position as a digital innovation hub, as a project region of smart factories. And we will find out, I think you told me it's 31 of October. Well, all kind of...
Sounds like you're doing a lot to work.
Yes, not on my own. We have a team, a small team. And we are, on top of this program, we are now establishing all kind of spin-offs. One of the spin-offs is a joint smart factory that we are building up now as a greenfield in the city of Emmen. And so we do not, that's not a transition from an existing manufacturing, but we completely build up a new one based on our insights on what smart factories should look like, and it is a shared facility. So it's not owned by a single company, but by a group of companies, and by therefore we try to develop a alternative. You can as a company, you can produce it themselves, or you can bring the work to the subcontractors. But you can also try to share a manufacturing facility. And that's what we are building up. And that's these are spin-offs from the regional smart factory project. That's in general.
Thank you, Hans. I think there's a lot of insights into activities, specific activities, how you're concretely working with these key enabling technologies, packaging them in these smart factories, and then how you're rolling these out into other forms. Anu, what are you working with in relation to KETS or value chains or?
Well, I mean, there's two things. I think, firstly, it's, I work at the Center of Expertise, so we are, with our students and staff, we work with energy cooperatives. So it's a very different value chain aspect that I think it's a business model that you don't see or hear about a lot. Just to take one step back, I think that innovation, to me, there are three types of innovation. There's business-driven innovation, which is happening every day in a lot of our businesses. You have research-driven innovation, which is the big R&D with the patents and things. And then there's a third one, for me, that's a new and interesting development, is a consumer-driven innovation. And I don't mean that they're just part of a panel to taste the different taste of chip crisps, but consumers are a very important big driver of innovation. And in the energy cooperatives, there are neighborhoods that come together, or villages, and they're also involved in these value chains. So that's one thing I want to say. And the second thing I want to say is that we also work with small and medium enterprises who are already exporting. These are in the metal sector. But what we're seeing is that they're very successful as individual businesses in different metal technology processing aspects. But what they're finding very difficult now is to really to get into the global value chain on a different level. And I want to connect that with the theme that I want to bring up today, I hope, in this discussion, about the need for more complex knowledge development. And I think that that's a very important aspect about this. If you want to be talking about KETS and global value chain, but especially global value chain, they're having a very complex knowledge base is a very important part. And being at the University of Applied Sciences, I think that we're very privileged that we're able to do that. So we're not just only on science of math or energy of economics, but we have a center on energy. There's no faculty of energy at our partner university. We have research on healthy aging. Now, these are more broader themes that bring together, and which also perhaps connects very different disciplines into there. So I think those are two things, at least at this point, I'd like to mention.
Okay. Thank you very much, Anu. And Rad?
Yes, thanks. My name is Gerard Berendsen, just with the difficult G again.
Again.
Again, here he comes again. I call myself an entrepreneur. And that means that I'm sometimes looking at the things we are discussing from the other side. And when I'm frankly to you, this morning I got an overview of all cluster things that were happening, and frankly spoken, I don't understand one word of it. That's my problem, maybe. So I really respect the work you're doing. But on the other hand, as an entrepreneur, I would like to have access to facilities and to services that help me to go further on the path that I'd like to walk on. And that's the question, I think one of the main questions I have for today. In the meantime, I'm working in clusters, I suppose. In the meantime, I've been working as researcher. I've been professor at the university, worked at clustering and as I call in organizational networks. I'm working in industry as quality manager, and I'm responsible for several foundations and societies that are working in the field of process improvement, business development, and new business modeling. And the only thing I want to address is there's a lot I'm involved in, and I still have a lot of questions. Maybe more questions for myself, for you, than answers. But I would like to take you back when I was a little child. Maybe you cannot imagine that, but it is a long time ago. And at the time I was born in the area of Twente. That's a small region about 1.5 hours drive from here in the east of the Netherlands. And then we had this huge textile industry. Maybe you cannot imagine, but in the most successful days, it was responsible, this textile industry in my region, for 25% of the national gross income. And it has been far before I was born, but it was a very important region at that time. Now we still have some leftovers of this industry in our area. Maybe you know the famous company Tenkate, etc., but this has still been a very important role. Nowadays I'm involved with people who are asking, how can you help us, for example, to set new business and bring it really a step further. One of the questions, just last Friday, I had a discussion with two very with two entrepreneurs. They have a very long history because both are retired and they're working in the field of pyrolysis. And that's when you they build an equipment in which you can drop in tires or cables or even chicken dung if you want to do that. And they process it and there comes out oil and some gas you can reuse again for heating the system. But they already invested almost 6 million euros in development. And they're still looking for more money because they found some blockades, some barriers inside this development process. They need 350,000 euros more. But they have been everywhere. They have a huge network, they have a huge access to stakeholders, they have huge access to ministries, they have a huge access to agencies, like you are, for example. They have access to supply chains, to other companies they want to cooperate with, and they still got stuck in the middle. And what I want to address is that something is happening, that people have a good idea, but in fact, I am looking at agencies like you're responsible for, are supporting these kinds of new developments. And I'm looking in ways for how can you improve that system. So that would be my contribution for today. Maybe I'm a wolf in sheep clothes. I heard there were some sheep along here at these pastures. There's nothing wrong with sheep, but might be good to have a discussion on that as well.
I'm a little bit feeling like, okay, you're taking over my role as asking all the questions.
Sorry.
But maybe we have some answers from you. How is it that you can improve new development? What kind of because you're coming at it from the policy angle, working with concretely how, from a policy angle, do you incentivize industrial modernization, use of key enabling technologies? How do you do it in Lithuania?
So Hello, everybody. My name is Vaidas Gricius, and I'm representing Ministry of Economy, and I'm responsible for the industry, trade, and SMEs files. So it's any initiative that creates, opens possibilities to strengthen, to modernize industry is extremely important to us. And why? Why? The first thing that shows the importance, it's our industry part in our economy. Almost 20% of our GDP creates industry. So it's hard to argue that it's a very important sector in our economical structure. If we come back to the CATS, key enabling technologies, as it was showed in the previous presentation, the potential, it's hard to define. It has huge, it has horizontal maybe impact, multi effect to all industries, and to define the potential, it's hard. And when I was preparing for this discussion, I did a small monitoring in what is going in CATS in Lithuania. And let me give you an example, and I will give my conclusions. In the 2014-2020 period, Ministry of Economy established a financial measure for the industry, which is called CATS for Industry. And in the first call, we got 8 projects. And now we have second call, and now we have 34. So very multiply effect. So what was the conclusion which has made it that CATS still are not, industries still are not aware what is CATS? And if you are not aware what is it, you start to be very cautious, you know, and and you don't want, you are afraid of this. But I see the statistics, so we made it the first step. And I think if we look where is the most untapped potential now in industry, I think it's, for this day, it's metal products manufacturing and processing sector. There are a lot of projects in this sector now implementing. Unfortunately, we don't have any clusters here. So I think there, in this case, we have the most untapped potential. If we talk about the opportunities, what is the highest potential as regards CATS? So I have to mention lasers and engineering clusters, smart technologies, and the Lithuanian plastic sector. So they are very strong, and I think they are already ready to step on to global value chains. So we have made it this year a study about the clusterization, and about the clusterization, how it works in Lithuania. This study was made in order to change the conception of the clusterization, because on previous, in 2014, there was adopted the clusterization conception. So we have updated now, and we adopted in last week. Our minister adopted this new, and what showed this study, and that our Lithuania, a lot of clusters are still very young and weak, and they are not ready for the communication with the foreign market, and their capacities are too small, and awareness are not known of these clusters. So one of the challenges for us, like policymakers. For example, if in last period we, from the structural funds, we gave money for the creation of the clusters. So this period we moved the step forward, and now we want to strengthen the clusters and to give them forward step. So in conclusion, I think I want to end this contribution with a little bit wider insights. CATS clusterization has to be, I think, in line with others initiatives like Industry 4.0. It's industry revolution, but will recall not only industry revolution, it would recall, I think, a social revolution, because the skills has to be revised, has to be changed, and this social revolution and preparing for this industrial revolution, it will take a lot of time to change the skills, to have a workforce that is suitable for you. Other thing is circular economy. I think the environmental challenges that are coming also will be challenge for us, and we have to, when we're thinking about the CATS, about the clusterization, we have to in mind, we have to find a synergy between all these initiatives, and then I think we can keep our competitiveness at an international level, at high level.
Yes. Thank you so much, all four of you, for giving these introductory remarks, and it's sparked a lot of questions from me.
Yeah.
I'm going to take over the role as asking all the questions. And I don't know, nearly anything about CATS. And so for me, I was really looking for inspiration. So what is it, and how do you work with CATS, and what's it all about? And a couple of things stood out. Gerard, and I'm mispronouncing the name, but I'm trying to get the going. And I'm an entrepreneur. I need facilities. I need concrete things. And then here, he's working for smart factories. He has facilities, open facilities, concrete facilities that bring forward these key enabling technologies in different ways to modernize the manufacturing process. And you were talking about this as an opportunity area. And then also Anna was talking about, okay, we need to work cross-disciplinary and get people more skilled at working with complex adaptive systems, not seeing to come into value chains in a different way at a higher level. And you also mentioned skills. You need to upgrade the skills. So is it, when I'm thinking key enabling technologies, how you work with it concretely, is it facilities, like places where you bring these technologies, using these technologies together, putting them in practice? Is it also upgrading skills, how do you work with changing skill sets? Or are there other things that you do to work concretely with helping companies access and upgrade through these key enabling technologies? And I'm looking at you two, because you seem to be concretely working with both skills upgrading and facilities that bring these things together. Have I interpreted in a relevant way that these are concrete areas that you can work with, or?
Yeah, well, they invest a lot of money in these projects, so
Okay.
they learn from it. It's a complex question, because there are so many things in the basic. They learn themselves, and they learn each other. So it's not we organize the cluster and we took care of the money and we do the promotion, and but the companies themselves, they're helping each other. We have the study groups, so we took, for example, deep learning as a new topic, and we asked the professor to come and to explain what it is and how companies can implement this into their business. That's the knowledge side. The second is that we will bring it into practice under controlled circumstances, like a subsidy project, and the next step, they should be able to sell these building blocks individually or in partnership, just to the market. That's why we go to the Hannover Messe. First of all, to see what's happening in the big world of smart factories. Second, to tell the world that we are in business. And the next step will be that they will have international working relations. Because most of the companies are very small, very talented. It is in the area of IT and big data and some more traditional machine building companies, for example, who need to make a step from traditional conventional machines to self-learning production machines. That's a complete different area, and it's very complex as an original machine building company with 30 people, for example. Most of them are to do this step to get the knowledge what is so to be part of this your international value chain, it's just export or working with with clients abroad. That's now the project is set and everything is running, and we are looking for synergy, and the focus group is this group of SMEs. These are 14 SMEs providing the building block for smart factories. We try to encourage them to go abroad also. It's a small country. So our own market is limited. I don't know if it's limited because Industry 4.0 is a complete transition of everything in industry. So the market will be as big as you want. We do some initiatives to help to support these companies into the international. For example, in Europe you have the Factories of the Future program. We are now participating at least 5 of our SMEs are now participating in this European program for the first time. The bridge was this Philips company. They are very experienced in European programs, and they bring now the SMEs onto the European level.
Okay.
That's how.
Okay.
That's ideal situation, because it's for the first time for most of them, and it's complex. And we are now exploring the possibilities to work with Germany, and we asked the Fraunhofer Institute to become partner of our consortium. Fraunhofer is the technology institute from Germany, and to be the bridge between our consortium and the German industry. We already have some first talks with, and we are trying to set up something in the framework of the Interreg. Because smart factory is something everyone shares.
Yes.
It's a great topic to talk about, because everybody is interested in smart factories, because it will be the future.
Yep.
Is it an answer?
Yes, yes, thanks. Anna, I'd like you to elaborate. You brought up this, the complex adaptive systems and working with, how do you work with helping companies to be better prepared for working with these adaptive systems and upgrading?
No, I'm glad you asked, because I think one of the most important work we have, and I think all of us in our different capacities, is to help businesses, but policy, but also educational institutions to understand the direction in which we are moving. So the world is moving, and yes, that's everybody knows it, like you said, everyone talks about it, smart factories, but I think what we need to do is to start having the dialogues and with groups of stakeholders, and it can be at any level, it can be at very small businesses who are just taking the first steps into internationalization, or it can be at a very higher level where clusters also want to move into internationalization, cluster-to-cluster collaborations. I think if you say what's the how-to, I mean, the first thing we always say is that get your group of stakeholders and start to make map what is changing, what is the direction of this change, what are the opportunities that then present themselves for us to move that way. And then the next question is, what do we then need to do individually, or as a group of a cluster, or as a region? So all the things you asked about, how do we do the human capital development? How do we make sure that we have the right innovation or the knowledge development? How do we make sure the right people are at the table? I mean, that's all in that dialogue, being in dialogue and making strategic decisions as a collective process, I think is a very, very important part of it. So for me, and like Hans says, and Gerrit says as well, and Gerrit this morning also said, you just start to do. You start to take the first step. You agree on a general direction. Okay, I think the world is going, in different ways, and we want to move this way. We agree collectively, and we take the first steps. And you learn through experimentation. You learn through making those. And that's, I think, the most important instrument we have. I don't think we have a choice anymore. And maybe that's one of the things that I think that we can do together better, to create a sense of urgency for why we need to collaborate and why do we need to try to understand what's happening and how to take the next step. And I think a lot of the work that you're doing with new business innovation and sectoral innovation and modernization, I mean, those words, it's all part of that big plan, but we need to first, it's every time taking the first step, but then collectively, I think.
Okay, that's very good. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to open it up now. I need to stop talking. Who else has some questions out there? Yes. Jesus. I remember your name.
Is it working? Yeah, okay. Thank you to all the speakers. Okay, very interesting questions and topics you talk. I mean, regarding the use of key-enabled technologies, I think that in difference to other sectors, the knowledge is in a set of companies, they know about the learning, sensoring, monitoring, and those things. And the potential users are either final consumers, other companies, that want to incorporate them. So there is a special link there. There is a need, you create. So probably it's easier to build up links, between cooperation. But I wondered what challenges, from your experience, are still facing, I don't know, intellectual property, when you go down to the real wall, okay, and you have to establish a real collaboration, and they have to work together to build a product, for instance, What's the real challenge there? Because there are still a lot of things that you have to think about that, before you get a real product, a result, of that collaboration. I just wondered that, to go deep, a little bit deeper, in those links, how they collaborate. Just that.
Does anybody want to take that question?
Yes, I would like to take that one. And I'm not quite sure if I really understand your question, but I try to answer it. When you look at the things that are happening outside, what are really happening in society, then we have a lot of issues to solve, challenges that we face. When you look, for example, at resources are declining, and we are looking for ways, for example, in circular economy, how to recycle resources that we need to keep up our production. We're here in a special area where we talk about energy transition, etc., renewable energy. It's there because it has a very important reason. That's why we're looking at. When we talk about new business modeling, then it's not only about setting up new businesses from an economic perspective. It is also about how do you solve the societal issues that you have. that we are really facing. So when you look at ways to set up value creation or value change, and that was the topic I was invited for. When you look at value change, then you need, okay, what topics do we have to address then? And how are we going to solve it? And do we have programs that are really stimulating to solve these issues by the use of companies or economic activities for that? And that's a whole different ballgame. So a lot of companies experience that they have to firefight the traditional companies that just get rid of their waste, and the society is paying for that, just for one example. So how can we help and stimulate ideas that are solving this waste problem, this waste issue, and still not bringing them in a situation that they have to do it on their own, because it's a society interest that we are trying to stimulate that. And I've been involved in several exchange programs between the northeast of here, of the Netherlands, here, this region, and the northeast of Romania. And one question is, how can we change the ways we support this initiatives by changing the subsidy system or reallocating subsidies in a different way? That's the real challenge that we have to face, I think. And that's where also you come in to help us and to see if you can make that possible. Because I see it's not only something that has to be done by individual companies or a cluster of companies. No, it has to be done by you as agencies, the government, universities as well, to bring in new technologies or new ideas. And just give me one example, and it's very close because I'm involved in nature conservation as well. But this afternoon, sorry for you, but I'm leaving to University of Groningen to talk about how can we use face recognition in wildlife to be able to have better nature conservation strategies, for example. That's based on, this face recognition is based on deep learning you just mentioned. And it's just try to see if you can apply it in day-to-day practices. That's something I think that is done by entrepreneurs. That's something that people really understand, well, how can I use all these new technologies? I don't have any idea about what deep learning is. And in fact, I don't give a shit. I just want to use it. That's what's happening. And I want to bring people together that are really using it. So that's where I'm into. I'm trying to set up networks. I'm trying to set up people that are working, call it a cluster or whatever you want to, that are really into it, and trying to find the solution for the issues that you are facing during this new business development roadmap.
Thanks, and you also had an answer?
I want to add, I very much agree what you said, and how to say, I want to maybe summarize or concretize. For example, I will tell from not from the policy making perspective, from the industry perspective as regards cats, what is the biggest challenge? The biggest challenge is that SMEs, industry, they make investments in cats and they want feedback tomorrow. But cats are not in this case. If you make the investments, you have to walk a long way that you have to get the feedback. The feedback is mass production. So you have to walk a long way. You have to be very patient. You can fail in this long way, but you have to stand up and to go till the end. So what I very much agree that it demands time, it demands knowledge, it demands everything, and so you have to be patient. That's the biggest challenge, that you invest money and that they come back not tomorrow, they come back day after tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. I have one question, then I'm going to ask you, you can have your question. You bring up, it's a long-term investment, and also the return on the investment might not come, it seems to come from unexpected players, other players that get to apply the knowledge in other fields. So whatever, facial recognition being applied for nature conservation. I'm sure the guys working with facial recognition didn't think about that. Yeah. And we also heard from Anu, it's about just experimenting and setting some processes into action and just experimenting. So is it about these long-term investments? Is it also risky investments? Is it also giving them these stakeholders the leeway to test some different things, to work with different knowledge fields, experiment and use these things and see what solutions come up? And in that case, are policymakers ready to have instruments that are these kind of risky investments? Are these the kind of projects that you have been working with?
Yes.
Yes?
It's probably my example that I showed in the very beginning of my contribution. Maybe also you can make conclusions that when you try something risky, you assess the risk. And I think our industry has much more improved with the risk assessment. And here, like policymakers, we have to take some risk on our shoulders. So that's why we created such a measure, financial measure, to share the risk with the industry, to share if they will fail, but they will have the support from the government, from the ministry, to not to fail, but to stand up and to go this long way.
Okay. Rima?
Thank you very much. Very interesting discussion, interesting thoughts, and you shared your experience. From the point of our project, I'm very curious, and I have a question to Hans. How did you manage to put together so many players, and big players like Philips, Fokker, and then cluster, and then SMEs, and all together, how you make them willing to cooperate? It's one thing. What you identify as success factors for you call it program, Smart Factories, I say kind of project, and actually you are a network of networks. And what are the key success factors were to start this initiative? And the third question, how do you see your further future? What actually is your further goals? Thank you.
Oei.
So how did you get people? How did you get the people together?
It's
Key
not,
success factors.
Sorry? How did you manage to get this group together? It's not from one day to another. I work already 15 years in this region, 15. I think we have a strong concept. The smart factory concept is really the future of many manufacturing companies and suppliers of building blocks. So everyone is convinced about that. There is no discussion. So it's more, we talked about risks. It's risky if you do not invest in this new world of technology and possibilities. And so we have the wind in our back. But why do they participate in my consortium? It's my consortium, and not in others. That's the question. For this typical kind of project, I think to talk about what are success factors, it's always the more IT and the more automation, it's the people who make the difference. Every project has 3 key persons in it. So my project has 3 key persons, people who know each other quite well also in the weekends, and who want to call them in the evening. So this kind of energy, for example, we have a guy from Philips. We made him a professor at the university. That's one of the. He's in my team. I'm in my team. I'm happy still. I'm in my team. So it's a social process. It's about industry and about IT, and it's about automation. But But still, it's a social process. I cannot describe how you should do it. It's not an answer, but you knew that it's this kind of answer. And then the key factors, what for us was very important, that every step we made is based on a business model. So that we started with the business, not the business model, what's the right word? The business model. So every pilot, we have 11 pilot projects, and companies need to invest, and they knew in advance what would be the results. So, and they could count on the results of the project. So that was very much the basis of the Regional Smart Factory program. It was not a policy or not a concept, it was the business model of the big companies and the SMEs as the suppliers of technology. I think that, and still it is the, and the third was the future. We are now, as I tried to explain, in the process of, we opened the doors and we are getting more and more an eco-structure, and all the other companies can participate. And we have many new companies from the IT and the online industry and the creative industry. So we are very much mixing up old and new, and that's a big well, for me, myself, I want to have a budget of 100 million. I'm now halfway, that's my added value, to set the region of smart factories in all the aspects, and something like that.
Anu, you had a comment, and I see you're also biting at the bit, so...
Yes, I am.
So Anu?
Sorry for that.
Well, I just want to bring a different perspective, also because I promised that one of the reasons why I was allowed to sit up here twice is also to bring a different perspective from different places. What you see in Malaysia and China, for example, there's a different strategy. They decide that we're going to bring these key technology or these advanced technologies, higher value adding in relative to where they're at in their economy. And they say, okay, we set up a cluster. So in Malaysia, you have an electronics cluster in the northern part of Malaysia. And what they did there is that they then brought German companies that were interested because they're, German companies or German research or companies have the technology, and Malaysia had very entrepreneurial, they have the cheap labor, and they come together and they join a consortium, and there's a whole cluster around electronics in Malaysia. And you see the same thing in China, and I don't know much about India, but this is also another way of working, and I think that in some of our regions that's happening, and I don't think that that's also a bad thing, So on the one hand, I'm very much into emergence, and I'm very much into letting things happen. And I want to give a different example, which I think is that sometimes it happens. And this is from Sweden. It's from Karlstad, the paper province. And I think that's a really interesting example. It was the paper and pulp industry, huge mills. They were leading industry. But in the meantime, they have shoot-offs of 4 or 5 clusters coming off, and one of them is advanced packaging. So it can also be that you just get these lovely presents by having old industries that then allow for innovation that then spins off into these new higher value added clusters or businesses and value chains. And I thought that that's also good to hear, that there are different ways how this can happen.
They've actually kind of reinvented their...
Into the forestry.
Like cluster focus.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
not just paper, it's...
Yeah, it's now forest-based, and
yeah.
I'm a big fan of them. So yeah, I see someone very pretty. Yeah, so they've now become the forest-based industry, and they had a whole fiber flow, and it was really very fascinating to see how, if you let industries and businesses continue to emerge, and how if you add knowledge, and they've worked very closely now for the, with Karlstad University, that's brought about new clusters and new developments and innovation. And one word that I just want to throw in before I stop is connecting, and I think you brought it up, bringing new connections together, and that does wonders as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
As I just adding something to what you said, I think that, well, there are a lot of initiatives in society. A lot of people are creative, etc., and have ideas how to, well, solve some problems or issues you have. I think that's not the issue. I think that is something that is typical human, and we start up and see wherever we can come. I think the most important thing is to team up and to stimulate the most promising things. That's what's happening. And I have been discussing with quite a lot of entrepreneurs when I was professor. I did several case studies, around 35 companies and collaborations, etc. So there were real partnerships. And all these guys were telling me, well, almost all guys, they told me, okay, well, we started up with a good idea, and then we continued, and then we were stuck in the middle, but we couldn't go back because we invested so much in this particular idea that we had to continue. Otherwise, we would break the company down or something like that. So there is a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy in it that you need to continue with your activities to find solutions for what it is. And I call it, it's doing is the new thinking. Doing is the new thinking in a way that you step forward. You don't know actually where you're heading for. You have an idea, you have to go in that direction, but step by step you create new opportunities, and that's what really entrepreneurship is. And the only thing is that, for example, when you look at the system that we have been discussing about clusters, etc., that's not about stimulating new ideas. It's about stimulating ideas that already have been proven because they have been successful. And that's why you bring in the money and why you think this should be the agenda, this should be the program for the next coming years. But the whole basic idea behind what I would try to say is, look at the game changers. You don't know what the game changers are right now because they are actually now starting up, but nobody knows them. How can you scout these game changers and that you are also ready not for what we are investing in, what ideas we're investing right now, but also for the next generation? And that's something that also is very challenging, I think, for this environment we're in, also for entrepreneurs, but also for governments, for universities, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm. We had a question over here, and there, and there. Ooh, this is great. 3 questions. Start here, and maybe we'll move geographically like this.
Yes, hello. My name is Joep Hoveling. I work for SNN. I would really like to draw your attention to one of the initiatives which we stimulate by subsidies. It's called Connectivity North. I think Hans is also very familiar with it. And I think it's very suitable for the topic we're discussing because it's about connectivity, so connected devices, big data, etc. And the interesting thing is that there are 3 clusters from the northern Netherlands working together within that project. It's about the water cluster, the energy cluster, and also the healthy aging cluster. And what they actually do is they look for companies who, well, they want to know what is your strategy and how can connectivity be part of that strategy. And on the other hand, they try to look where are the interesting companies who are dealing with connectivity and how can we connect them to each other. So it's about exploring, it's about creating new linkages, and actually the same thing with the paper industry, I guess. And I think that is a very interesting objective which comes closely to the key enabling technologies and also in relationship with intersectoral and interclusteral the approach. So that's, I want to draw your attention. Maybe you can also reflect or add something to that. Thank you.
Thanks for that example. That's a really good example of how you go about kind of stimulating these new linkages, and this is how you're doing it, or one of the methods of doing it in Northern Netherlands. We can take the next question here, perhaps? We can collect questions and then get some reactions.
Yeah. Hello, I'm Nikos, representing one of the only Greek partner in this project, CERT, a research center in northern Greece. I do agree with you that one of the biggest challenges is not only to create new ideas and challenges, but to give energy for the already existing ideas. And here is my question comes. Normally, the idea comes from one person or from one company. How do you manage during the team building, for example, because one idea might violate the strategic aims of another company, and at the same time, a mutual synergy might come up to solve the idea or the challenge. You need trust, you need good persons on the team. It's not only the companies, because during the brainstorming or during the cluster meeting, there are persons sitting on the table. I do believe that it's a social process, knowledge transfer, it's a social process. Knowledge does not exist on the files, but on our minds. But I think that's my question. How do you address, because behind the discussion and ideas, there are strategies, money, investment that might be violated somehow during a common discussion. How do you balance this?
Okay. Okay, a third question, and then we'll get some responses.
My name is Cristina Șerbănică. I'm a Jean Monnet professor of European Studies. And my question looks like a closing question, I think. So Europe is said to be at the crossroads today. And there are very hard talks about the future of Europe, and especially about the future of the budget post-2020. Unfortunately, there are persons attending these kind of talks which are emphasizing the so-called European innovation paradox, saying that the more the EU invests in innovation-related initiatives, especially in less developed countries, the innovation divide did not disappear, and the innovation rankings are always look always the same. So my question for you is how can we convince the EU to continue to invest and support innovation-related initiatives, and whether you are a supporter of the scenario that Europe needs to be, that we should do more together, or that we should do less together but more efficiently. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. All right, so an example with the Nordic connectivity, any comments or reactions to that? The question about how do you, when an idea comes from one, how do you make it a group thing? And then the final, more philosophical question that we had. We can take comments. You can just, who wants to start?
I'd like to start with the question of you, because the last one is I think a political one. I'm not into politics, so that's something different. But what I saw when I was discussing how do you approach innovation with all these entrepreneurs, and then they said, well, of course, competence is very important. They actually, before they start up, they think about what competences do we need to realize our dreams. What people do we need aboard? Sometimes they already have them in the network, or are they already cooperating with some people that are suppliers or customers or whatever, and they team up. They know what actually they are heading for, and they are also trust each other competencies. But there is another thing, and that was very remarkable, that in all these successful case studies, so in which they were really capable of bringing the technology really alive and into a profitable business model, then the amount of senior managers, senior entrepreneurs was pretty high. That means that they brought in all the experience, and they were also ready to discuss the added value that every partner brought into this cooperation. And they also were capable of changing the financial profit that was initially agreed on. So if they thought that people changed the added value in this value chain, then they really were capable of changing that. And that was further peculiar, because then there was a really trustful situation, and they were in fact paying or letting others benefit from the real added value in this value chain. And the first steps, for example, when you really start from the beginning, from scratch, and there was nobody involved, and you try to set up a cooperation or the collaboration, then you saw that they were focusing on almost only on competencies. And that when this collaboration collapsed, that it was a competence issue. But when they already knew how to cooperate, then there were some moral, ethical issues that were responsible for a collapse of the cooperation. And that means that also the focus on what is on the table when you're really collaborating with others, that it is changing from the start from competencies. Can somebody really deliver what he is expected to deliver? Or is he behaving himself in a proper way that we agreed upon? Because then something comes up what you never expected. And it can be quite a lot of different issues that pop up. I can come back to that later on, but it was very remarkable. So when you start up, be very careful about the competence that you have on board, look at the right people, and what is also important, referring to this issue, is that companies can't work on themselves. If you have an idea, you can produce that completely on your own, just go ahead. You don't need anyone. But technology is so complex that you need to team up and to exchange experience, to team up, to bring in other competencies, etc., etc. And that's the real basis for cooperation then.
Thanks. Who wants to go next? Anu?
Well, I mean, I just want to add to that. I think, I mentioned it earlier, I think that when there's a need and when there's a sense of urgency, I think the need to collaborate is important. So one of the things in strategy that what you can do is to try to see how can we create that sense of urgency so that it then rises above the individual needs and competition. And this is a very important aspect of it. So that's one thing to do. Sometimes it's by broadening the vision of the scope of which you're doing things, and that sometimes helps. But I do want to add, and continuing to that, and I don't know whether it answers the question of connectivity. What I thought was an interesting lesson that we can learn from Silicon Valley in the 90s, when the Japanese electronics suddenly came up, and Silicon Valley was in a really big dip. And there was a sense of urgency, and what they did, and I thought that this is a lesson that I think that a lot of us can use, is that they set up a strategic board, and the strategic board were with stakeholders of very different areas. And this is, again, coming back to my big thing about dialogue, but having strategic boards where you can and address the urgent need about, okay, how do we get ourselves out of this dip, this major recession, and how can we get further, and setting that up on a very broad, and it's very important that it's very broad. It's not the same suspects or same people, that there has to be diversity, there has to be the multi-level and multidisciplinary type that people talked about earlier today. So those are, I think, some things that we can also take on board. So yes, I think we do a lot of good things, and it is also a very Dutch habit, and maybe it's interesting to talk about it, nobody did, that we have a tradition or history of, it's called poldering. So that we are always in alliances of coalitions, very broad coalitions, where businesses, the union, the employees, and so forth are sitting on it. So this is a tradition that exists here. It's almost business as usual for us, but it is something, especially when we want to move to a higher level, it can be very useful. So that's for now. If nobody takes up the last question, I have something to say about it later.
Okay, we have Hans and we have Vidas, and
maybe short reaction to the last question. It's very philosophical, but I will try. I think here is two things. One thing that I want to mention about post-2020, according to these days, according to technological development, according to the social developments and so on, it's very hard to predict, to make some strategic decisions for this day. It's, I think, this strategic management now you can maybe in short terms you can plan. Other thing, if you want to take the strategic decisions, you have to collect all the data, what was best practices, what the mistakes was made, and to learn from this. So I think we need here very good report, very good monitoring what was done during this period, 2014-2020, and then you can make some strategic decisions maybe to set up priorities post-2020. What is the most challenges, and I think we have to keep these priorities after post-2020, knowing what we have done good, what we done bad, and to learn from our mistakes maybe.
Hans, some final words before we close the session?
Well, perhaps a little bit about that connectivity north. It's more or less inspired by the region of smart factories, but then for water and the agro-industry and the energy, so the main sectors in a region, we've made a very good start, and it's a promising formula to bring innovative questions or industry, to combine them with innovative suppliers of these new technology. And it's simple in the process, but also very valuable. You should not organize this too much, and it can be done.
Yeah.
And about this EU question, I don't know. I'm not. I try to go to Brussels not only more than once per year. Then it's better for me.
How can we convince Europe to continue to support innovation-related initiatives? As there are some very pessimistic persons there saying that Europe should cease to finance such initiatives. That was the question.
But it's not. Is it a discussion in Europe?
Yeah, it's the discussion about the 5 scenarios, the 5 scenarios, the future of Europe, and there are 5 scenarios there, which are put on the paper, and indeed, 2 of them are that we should collaborate more together, or we should collaborate less together in the future. Yeah.
I'm going to give a go on that. I think back to a little bit is what went well and why did it go well. Just to give up the good stories of these kind of initiatives and the benefits of these kind of initiatives is one idea around that, and perhaps that can get discussed more in depth in the afternoon. But I'm going to try to give a short summary of little highlights that I picked up on from this session. I thought it was fantastic discussion, and thank you all for being so engaged. It's how you put key enabling technologies into action. Some things that highlighted, you need platforms for both experimentation and also for gathering different stakeholders, and don't be afraid to involve the unusual suspects or not the usual suspects. Also, I love the doing is the new thinking. Yeah. It's all about kind of experimenting. It's not necessarily coming up with new things, but it's using existing things in new ways to help evolution occur and to upgrade in the value chain and to renew. And also on the kind of the policy angle, it's giving investments in these kind of crossing or the linkages or however you want to call it, however you want to work with it, but investing in these kind of, taking these kind of risky new linkages and using new things and existing things in new ways. Thank you for a lovely panel discussion. Thank you.